everybody. Welcome to the Light Investor Show again. This is Josh Ulmer, Mike Mahoney, and our special guest, David Ulmer, one of the founders of JetBlue. He's here to talk a little bit of wisdom today to us. So buckle up. Let me give you a little bit of background about David. He's a Bradley graduate, so go Braves. And he was, if any of you can run a 5-minute mile, he was one of our varsity cross country.
For 4 miles.
For 4 miles straight.
4 miles, yes.
And he was one of the founders of JetBlue. So he's a very successful individual, which I know a lot of you like to see and hear some of these wisdom sessions. So this is today's topic. So thank you for coming today, David.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, our best guest ever yet, so.
Yes, our most famous guest ever. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself and like how you got into the airline business. From Bradley to your life.
Yeah, well, I graduated from Bradley in 1969 and did a couple other things before airlines, but I actually got into the airlines job through an ad in the paper. Not how people get jobs these days, I guess, but what I like to say about that is whatever works, you try everything. You try anything and everything, that's for you, because whatever works, and you can't say, well, this works and this doesn't. And so I actually got a job with a company called Hughes Air West, which was what they call a local service carrier in the airline business in 1975, I believe it was. And that was before the industry was deregulated. So,
right.
So everything was completely regulated. I was a regulatory analyst. So we pursued what they called root cases before the Civil Aeronautics Board, which were really administrative law cases, and swear me in, testify to what you're going to do and whatever. Because you always had, anytime you had a route, you had 3 or 4 other airlines competing for that same route. Mm-hmm. And then the Civil Aeronautics Board would dole them out as they saw fit. But so that was a regulated industry, but the industry is a perfect one of perfect information for an economist or for someone with economic training or economic theory, because it has a complete history of both supply and demand. So all the carriers today even have to report their financial results to the government every quarter on a set of forms. They call them Forms 41. That the common set. So it's a database that compares every carrier's cost relative to its pilots, its flight attendants, its fuel, everything else that goes with it. So there was that cost database. There's also a supply database that showed how many, and is still there today, that shows how many times a month you fly between point A and point B and how full your airplanes were. And that goes to the government as well. But there's also on the demand side, there's what they call the Origin and Destination Passenger Survey, which is a survey of all customers that the airlines have and where they flew and how they got there. So I can tell you between point A and point B in the country, last quarter, this many people flew. This is who they took, whether they connected once or twice, or whether they flew nonstop, and how much they paid. So it's a database that's kind of a complete information of both supply and demand. So that was there. But there's nothing really to do with it if you're a regulated industry. So you can't. But in the Carter administration, the late 70s, mid to late 70s, the airlines, the administration itself made a conscious decision to deregulate the airlines and take them from what was then basically a luxury good down to basically a commodity. So they commoditized, if that's a word, airline travel.
Absolutely.
And so the carriers, all the carriers had to adopt. You could do anything you wanted. You could fly anywhere you wanted. You could charge anything you wanted. The only thing a lot of them couldn't do is make any money doing it. So the regulatory departments became planning departments, and basically it was your decision with your management where you flew and how So that engendered a tremendous amount of competition and also engendered a lot of startup carriers, most of which failed, by the way. And it also engendered a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and pretty much to the point where you have a consolidated industry today. But between then and now, there were, I think we were talking about 152 bankruptcies, somewhere in that. If you Google it, you can get a list of names. All of those names, I can tell you the story behind virtually all of them. and there's, a lot of it is a story of basically of overexpansion and trying to put an airline where you live or where you think there's demand but there isn't. And you have to be very careful with the competition. So JetBlue was my sixth airline. Again, none of them went bankrupt while I was there. But a lot of them did merge. A lot of them did have mergers. So when my first carrier, Hughes Air West, merged with North Central, I didn't want to go to Minneapolis, so I got a job with Frontier in Denver, and then went from there. Went with various other airlines. But so JetBlue was my sixth. We started in New York City because New York City at the time was probably the last place in the country that didn't have a low-fare carrier. Southwest was the big low-fare carrier, and you can track Southwest's history of where they expanded and how the demand expanded with their price structure, because they're still probably have the most customer-friendly price structure in the industry today, because they don't charge the big fees and for bags or for changes or for those kind of things. But and they've been very successful. They're one of the few companies. They're the only big corporation that hasn't gone bankrupt in this time period. So they've measured their expansion, and they've been very, very careful about where they expanded, while at the same time growing. So Southwest is the kind of the premier example, and we wanted to kind of replicate that at JetBlue. We started with only a couple of airplanes, but New York was LaGuardia, in terms of airport facilities, LaGuardia and Newark were pretty much full, and JFK was not. But JFK does have slot restrictions from 3 in the afternoon to 7 at night. So from 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. they have slot restrictions, because that's when all the flights come in from Europe and back. So it's kind of hard. You can't fly, excluding those hours. But we were able to get some expansion of the slots in those hours basically through a political process with the New York senators and the New York representatives, because New York itself, had a lot of competition with intrastate New York and New York Buffalo, and those which had a tremendous amount of demand when People Express flew it, were dramatically underserved and overpriced. So there was an opportunity there. There was a big opportunity in New York, Florida, which is a big market and was relatively well priced, but not priced as low as it might have been if you could provide that at the right price. So startups, and particularly in JetBlue, we were very very, very conscious of our cost structure. We got a good airplane deal with Airbus, because we raised $140 million in order to buy new airplanes primarily. So I helped raise that money in the summer of '98. Did a couple kind of like road shows, but investor presentations with various of the financial the banks and a lot of venture capitalists. But we got about $30 million from the Soros Fund. We got another $30 million from a VC firm in San Francisco called Weston Presidio. About $20 million from the Bank of Boston. Another $20 million from a VC firm in Boston, and the rest spread out around. but.
Can I ask, you run that number, I was reading, one of the bank, I forget, it was one of the big wirehouses was gonna give like 40 million, and you guys, were they originally gonna call the firm Taxi? They
Yeah,
had their own Wikipedia.
David D. Lehman originally had
Yes,
that.
okay. And they wouldn't give you the money, they weren't gonna give him the money
I'm
unless they got a
surprised,
name.
I'm surprised they didn't. I'm surprised you actually found that, but because his prototype presentation did have the name Taxi.
Yes, okay.
You can't name an airline Taxi because Taxi can't taxi.
Ah.
You know, Taxi to
Sorry,
Taxi,
I
like,
didn't
whatever.
throw that
No,
in.
it's an interesting,
Yes,
it was a fun thing. Because an airplane is essentially a taxi.
Right, sure.
It just goes further, and if you can put it there at the same price as a taxi, you can actually, you can actually make money at it. But so he originally had that.
Okay. Well, can I get some other Wikipedia facts while I got the share so I don't interrupt? Because I went and watched David speak at Bradley. I saw he was very humble, and I got on Wikipedia this morning, I'm like, wow. So 2020 Wikipedia, JetBlue, 394 of the Fortune 500, so it's a Fortune 500 company. 285 airplanes, 22,000 employees, $6 billion a year in revenue. I'll shut up now. Because he was very humble. He's not going to tell us. Yes, just the
It is
facts.
fun facts. I did leave. I retired in 2007, so I've been retired for a while, and we were not at those numbers, but
I know,
we
but
were approaching
you
them,
you started this. I mean,
We went from zero revenue
baby,
to it was over $1 billion when I
Yeah,
left,
fabulous.
and probably about as I remember 7,000 or 8,000 employees, but. And it's continued to grow since then because we developed a really strong base.
Sure.
And a strong base of what we did much better than a lot of the other airlines is we concentrated on customer service.
Well, I like that comment you made too, and I actually made a note of that because you mentioned Allegiant, which I fly a lot when I go to Florida,
Yeah.
and it's like a cattle car. I'm sorry, Allegiant. You get me there, I like it. It's point A to B. There's no connecting flights. It's cheap.
Direct
Seats are
flight.
uncomfortable. I bring my own cushion to sit on. But I mean, the comment he said that they rent their customers, whereas they didn't. They wanted to keep business and they wanted coming back. That's a great comment.
Airlines that rely strictly on price do rent their customers.
Yeah.
They get one year and.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily care if it's.
Oh, you're treated like cattle.
And but people,
We do
there are
it.
a lot of
Convenience.
people whose sole consideration when they fly is price.
Right.
And for $10 less, they'll do a lot. Allegiant, they do have a lot of charges for.
Oh yeah. You got a bag. You got to bring a brush with you.
Yeah, the unbundled product. So one
right.
product is getting on the
Yeah,
airplane.
your $200 flight and suddenly it becomes a $400 flight.
Yeah. Another product is sitting in a seat.
Right.
Assigned to sit in a seat.
No, we're going to get into this. We're going to get into this topic too. So there's other comment which we alluded to before we start taping days. I bring this comment up a lot to clients, and I've never heard someone else bring it up before. But there's a saying out there that says, you know how to end up with a small fortune. Start with a large one. Mm-hmm. And that's very much the case with entrepreneurs and people that start a business, have much success, or we even see that, like we mentioned, the lottery winners, professional athletes, people that accumulate a lot of wealth, concentrated wealth, but then don't diversify and end up losing it or maybe spend it. I mean, in other cases.
Yeah, there's
that was interesting.
You have to, when you develop a nest egg like I did, you have to diversify whenever you can. And usually that's with the IPO, and there are restricted times when you can actually trade.
Get off the table.
As an insider, so you can't just
take
it and run when you know everything is great. But so you do have to follow the rules about when you can trade. And usually that's when public information comes out at your quarterly reports or your quarterly investor calls. So it's but that does give you enough opportunity, and we couldn't trade as insiders until and that was not a federal regulation, but we couldn't trade until 6 months after our IPO. It's kind of a funny story. Our initial IPO was scheduled on September 11th, 2001.
Oh.
We had all of
For
our
an airline.
For an
airline. Oh my gosh.
course, we had to cancel that, but it was pretty traumatic, of course, because there aren't many industries that go in demand from whatever the baseline is to zero.
Well, it had to have been the same thing again back in 20, right, when they shut
Yeah, so
everything
COVID,
down. So they
COVID
did
is
it
the same
again.
thing. I mean,
Yeah.
COVID was September 11th at least, it lasted a couple of weeks.
Right.
And then it was pretty clear that people were going to fly again. And were
Do you think-
flying again.
This is kind of changing topics, but on deregulation, when you talked about that, and I didn't want to take the floor last, so I can ask the question, but I did have the question. Do you think it was designed to favor the bigger airlines against the smaller airlines?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I think it was initially exactly the opposite.
Okay.
It was designed to create startups
Great,
and designed to create
Competition.
price competition.
good,
As well as route competition.
Good.
But price
Capitalism at
competition.
work.
So, yeah, I mean, it was,
Destructive
again,
capitalism at work.
yeah, it was definitely, to take it from a luxury good to a commodity.
good.
And it succeeded. I mean, it succeeded dramatically. I mean, the deregulation of the industry created, double, triple demand. Is still expanding demand because there are still startups and there's still others that are, every airline is trying to grow, but there are, the startups are trying to grow pretty dramatically. But one of the biggest reasons for failure is growth too quickly and too fast, and trying to say, I can do this anywhere. Well, you can't do this anywhere unless the demand is there. And particularly because you have a huge marketing disadvantage. I mean, the big guys, the legacy airlines that they call them, have a tremendous marketing advantage, which you can't match. I mean, you can't match the scope and breadth of their route network and the number of places they fly, and they themselves develop frequent flyer programs to basically try and engender brand loyalty. I'm not sure how well those work today, but they do. They do have some influence on where people fly or who people fly with when they have to. And so those you can't match those either. I mean, because you don't have the same
Right,
destinations,
sure,
so you
yeah.
don't have the same rewards for the points that you might accumulate. So those programs were quite effective. I think the reason I say they're less effective, I think they're less effective now because the four big airlines have them. JetBlue has it as well, but again, you can't really match.
Can I jump in just for a
Yes,
second?
yeah, I'm sorry, I've been taking the floor.
Well, I think this is a story of economics. It's a story about, someone who understood economic principles, was able to leverage that and understanding and kind of be successful. But I think it's also a story about, it was good timing for you as well. Like the deregulation was very important. And a lot of our listeners don't remember what was regulation like in the airline industry, because they were not able to compete on price. They were not able to compete on
Destination.
a lot of things.
Yeah.
And the government actually had groups of people that were employed that would walk around and make sure you're not they would fine you for having voluptuous sandwiches. You can't have too good of a sandwich, or because it's unfair for competition, or your drinks can't be a certain size. So the inefficiencies of over-regulation in this case was not only a disaster for startups and kind of stifled competition, which it was intended to do. It was intended to make things equal, but ended up kind of just creating an environment where there was not a lot of innovation until they deregulated. Then you had a flurry of activity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I liked it when he mentioned on the yield management how that used to be. It was a manual process that the humans had to do and track the route. It was tracking the routing and the pricing and everything else, and how that had now turned into a computerized process, kind of like what's going on in the financial markets. Because the computers with AI and machine learning can do the logarithmic trading and programming, and probably make it much more efficient, right? To be really spot on with all the numbers you need to analyze with that data.
Yeah, there were always a relatively large number of people who simply looked at demand. This is a pretty pretty dull job, I guess, but, but you basically.
Some people like that type of stuff.
Yeah, the building of demand on flights and you know, if you did it long enough, well, you saw the history, the computer would give you the history of how those flights had built of demand in the past, and if they weren't following that pattern, you could lower the price, and if they were following better than that pattern, you know, something was going on, some sort of event that you didn't even know about that created travel was going on, you would see the demand rise, and you would essentially raise the price.
Well, I always see that, like when I try to go to Florida, if it's Christmas time, Thanksgiving time, or Easter time, I pay at least double for my airfare, if not triple.
Yeah, again, it's an industry where the demand swings.
Price discrimination,
are very, very dramatic.
Price discrimination.
Supply demand.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it is, I mean, it's just, you know, the times where are great demand is where the times you have to make money. It's sort of like, you know, Black Friday or whatever.
Right.
You know, there are these times,
Right.
and Thanksgiving being one of them, and Christmas, New Year's being another, where demand is just tremendous. As well as around a lot of the holidays, because, you know, people are flying, they're taking 3-day, you know, weekends and flying to go see family and those types of things. So you kind of have you have a base of business demand, which is fairly stable, even in ups and downs in the economy. The business demand base is relatively stable, but the leisure demand base is highly price elastic. And, very fickle, and particularly with JetBlue in New York, the demand from like New York to Buffalo was, at one point here, and then it was double or triple, and then when People Express flew it at $19, and maybe less sometimes, but when they did that, the demand just expanded because people could even business guys, you could set a lawyer could set up an office in Buffalo, or a financial analyst, you could set up an office and be able to fly back and forth on a very reasonable kind of known price, and service their clients and expand their business. So the airlines allowed that to happen. JetBlue allowed that to happen again with following the People Express example, but we didn't follow the example we didn't follow is their customer service, because they again didn't have a very any kind of reliance on customer service. They relied almost strictly on price. But the 40 markets they served went from like 6 million to 16 million passengers a year, and when they flew, and then when they stopped flying, or because they basically expanded too fast, they tried to do 747s across the country and across the Atlantic, at very cheap prices, but that was not their expertise, and they were not efficient at it. So it's one thing to offer a low price and be able to do that, but you have to produce your product efficiently enough that you make money at it. But and overexpand. You can only you have to be careful how you expand. And JetBlue expanded pretty quickly, but we were very, very careful about hiring and training in terms of and allowing people to serve customers. So many of the airlines, I'm sure you all had an example where the airlines will simply tell you that we can't do that. Our rules just don't allow us to do that. If you miss a connection or if something else happens, they simply say, well, these are our rules. Sorry. This is the rules. We had rules, but sometimes rules are maybe broken depending on the circumstances, and you have to allow your customer service agents to basically to satisfy the needs of the customer, or to at least to alleviate or somehow solve the problem. So if there's a problem, you have to allow your agents to be problem solvers, and not say, here, you solve this problem by this set of rules. So it wasn't my area. Again, my area was planning and pricing, but we did that so well it made it made it so much easier to be able to fly. I was telling Josh, we could, I thought maybe we could provide 3 or 4 or 5 flights from New York to Fort Lauderdale, for example, and we ended up with 9 or 10 because we had the right number of customers, and because the customers kept coming back. It's relatively easy to get them the first time, but keeping them coming back, it's the same people traveling all the time, the same people, the same families going back and forth, so you really want to be able to, and word of mouth is very, very important, if you're both ways, both bad experiences and good experiences. So if you can turn a bad experience into, if not a good experience, which it wasn't, but at least into one that the company did something about, and you'll come back and do it again, because then the customer will simply know that if something goes wrong, they're going to actually try to do something to solve the problem that if they didn't create it, the weather created it, or whoever created it. So, and everybody has their problems. I mean, JetBlue had its problems with customer service. Usually was trying to, a lot of the time, the worst of the customer service that people, kind of remember was trying actually to help the customer. So you hear stories about people on, and even at JetBlue Airline it was about a year or 2 after I left, but there was a huge snowstorm in New York, and it was the weekend before President's Day, and things were full. I mean, and we basically tried to get people out. It ended up not being the case, but they sat on the airplane for probably 10 hours. But there was no alternative the next day or the next week, and for the whole week to get them to where they wanted to go.
Right.
So.
And we've all got stories of being stranded at an airport,
Yeah.
or an airplane or something, right?
So we were
Mother Nature's in control sometimes.
right. Yeah, so we were over trying, I guess, to try and get people out, and it just ended up not happening. So that was kind of the worst of the customer experiences that we went through. But again, it was kind of a failure of trying too hard.
But a great success story, though.
Yeah,
I mean, like I alluded to
interesting.
at the very beginning, great success story.
Definitely.
Fabulous.
So, this is a money show too, right? And and Mike sent me some shots last night of how different airline stocks have done over a time horizon. And then look at the S&P 500, look at the small cap. What's your view? I don't want to get you in trouble, but
A forecaster.
yeah. Next 5 or 10 years.
No recommendation.
No recommendation.
Okay.
But how about this? But how about a little financial recommendation? Like if you could recommend to someone that you care about in the next 5 or 10 years, would you put your money into an airline stock, or would you go more broadly diversified into like an index fund, like an S&P or a small cap? And why would you recommend that?
Yeah, I mean
Would you take the risk on the individual stock?
the reason I took the risk in the airline
was
because I knew the business, and
Yeah.
I knew this was going to be successful. I told you guys a story yesterday that David Neeleman, our founder, he had 5 million of stock of the 140. He had a 5 of his own, which was actually priced underneath the 140 in terms of shares that it bought. And of course, shares are worth nothing until you actually go public. but we did have share, and he wanted to spread that out at least among his senior employees, and of which I was one. And he asked me how much I wanted to invest, and I told him X, and he actually flinched. Because I guess this money he was giving away, but he said, and he after he flinched, he said, "You must really think this is going to work." And I literally said, "David, I know it's going to work. I know, particularly if I'm in charge, you can, I know the markets, and I know that will go crazy." I think I used the word gaga, which that was before the But so I knew the markets were there, and I literally told them, I said, "Only you can screw it up. I mean, you can screw it up by not being able to operate, or not even getting it in the air. I mean, it's a difficult procedure just to go through all the FAA requirements of pilots and airplanes and mechanics and all of the things that you need, because safety is always the most important. most important thing. But we did, again, he did far better than I expected him to. And so my job was much easier than I expected it to be. Not that any job with any startup is easy, because it isn't. I mean, that's the big lesson is if you're gonna go to work for a startup, you're gonna work for a while. You're just gonna have to determine, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do it as my life's mission, at least for the time we start this company to the time at least.
It's your baby, right?
Keep growing and
Mike's business, right?
Yeah, human capital, and you put into it. Yeah.
So he literally flinched, but that was again, he didn't expect that I would want to take that much, and I guess he didn't realize that I thought I could make a lot of some money at it. I mean, I'm sure he did, because he made a lot of money as well.
Yeah.
But you do have to diversify, because you can't keep all your eggs in one basket, and particularly in an airline industry that is so fickle, and have such demand swings and competitive, competitive new startups of our own are different competitors, because you're always, as a planner, you're always subject to what I call the lowest common fool. But anybody trying to fill an airplane with price, and some of your routes would be, they're eating potatoes to eat with their gravy to somebody else, and so they can underprice you by underpricing you through one of their hubs, or through a connecting flight rather than your nonstop flight, and that's going to take maybe 20, at least 20, sometimes more % of the market if you don't match it. So you're kind of between a rock and a hard place, where you have to do the same thing back sometimes. And so there's a tremendous, it's a little more of an oligopoly situation today, but the breadth of the carriers' networks has come so they compete with one another. They do compete with one another, not always on price, but the startups from kind of nibble at the edges, as we say, and that's pretty irritating, particularly in a low margin business. I mean, you are in a low margin, high capital. Business, particularly when your product spoils, when your airplane leaves, with an empty seat, that seat could have been sold for a very minimal amount of money if you could actually figure out how to do it, and not impact the rest of not also give it to the rest of the people who are already
discount some, not others. Price discrimination.
So it's definitely a hard way to do that, but. So the competition, you really have to be very aware of the competition, the potential competition, and the best way to stave that off is to provide a good product. So
for sure. We see that a lot, so number one, like the diversification, that was a good comment there. But the whole customer service thing, like last night we had dinner, and we another financial advisor, he was having to talk to us about, like, a lot of his clients are coming in saying, like, hey, I'm really upset, I'm scared, and he's providing customer service for them, but education is part of it too. And how do you educate people, like, hey, what we're doing here is solid, or what we're doing at JetBlue, we got the good customer service, so be a repeat customer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
stick with it.
Well, it's a culture, right, at JetBlue. It's not just the service. It's actually they've dedicated their culture to being client focused.
Yeah, like Maui Jim here in town.
Right, sure.
Yeah, we literally, and still today, there were a set of was just a set of core values, which is just, and a lot of companies have it. It's 5 words. I think it can't be more or less. It always seems to be 5 words. But ours were safety, caring, integrity, fun, and passion.
I like it. Fun and passion, man. That one is good. It's not about money.
And still today,
service.
All the employees with their, because all the airlines have employee badges that you need to get into airports and everything. But those words are still on the
Nice.
badges of every,
I like that.
of every employee. And you know, there were also things behind that. You know, there were other, you know, tenets or principles. One of which was do the right thing, which seems weird, but
Oh, trust me, we talk about that a lot.
it seems weird that companies wouldn't. But
No,
there's
there's a lot of shenanigans.
Welcome to the world of finance.
Yeah, a lot of shenanigans in the finance world. Well, hey, listen, Mike, you know, David's got to catch a flight.
Yeah,
Speaking
we'll
about,
wrap it up.
but let's ask maybe one more question that you were thinking about. I know
I'm
we have-
good.
Oh, you're good.
I got all mine covered. I'm good. It's up to you. You got to end this one.
Yeah. So, any final thoughts of kind of some thoughts about to our viewers that overall on life, on things you're passionate about? What could you leave our viewers with some words from David?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, there are a lot of things I learned through working for a lot of different companies, and some of them have what I thought was pretty good management, and others, you know, what I thought was pretty poor management. But well, the first thing is you've got to put in the work. I mean, particularly if you're going to work for a startup, but even a company where you can grow through that company, you do have to put in the work. But you don't have to go crazy. I mean, I have a nephew that is in the financial business. He's 25. I mean, and he just got hired, but he works like 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And more, because he's on call.
Oh, he's young. He's 25.
Well, that's what they say. You know?
Life balance, you can wait a little while.
Which is, I guess, you know, obviously that's his decision, and you know, he'll probably do quite well at it because he is putting in the work. But there does need to be a balance there eventually. The other real thing is that I think you have to take your job very seriously. But that doesn't include taking yourself very seriously. And there's so many people, you know, throughout all of the companies that you know, they're more interested in their own, you know, their own egos or their own whatever, and they take themselves far too seriously. And that's not, you know, their job is to take their job seriously and not to take, you know, not to take themselves
on a pedestal.
their ego with it. And, you know, and then it'll take, the rest of it will take care of itself. So that's kind of one of the things I learned. Another is kind of a strange, I mean, it's not really strange, but it's about mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to admit it. But so that's, you know, and you know, your boss doesn't want to hear it. I mean, what your boss wants to hear, what you say is, I made a mistake. I know why it happened, and it won't happen again. And, you know, giving all the who shot Johns and what, why and where, and, you know, there was this computer glitch and there was this, you know, airplane, you know, glitch or whatever, you know, isn't what your boss wants to hear. You know, your boss wants to hear, I know it happened, I know why it happened, and it's not going to happen again. And then it will, so maybe you'll make another mistake. But so how you deal with your mistakes, I think, is real important. And I think you'll find it's real important with with both your bosses and your employees too. That's the other really big role, is that when you do hire people, you have to let them work. You have to empower them to do the job that you've told them they could do. You can't be afraid that they're going to take your job. I mean, they're supposed to enhance your job, and that's your performance, and that'll help both your performance and the people you hire, or if you're a hiree, that'll help help you get promoted. And so those are kind of the big ones, I think.
Those are great.
Yeah.
Really great. Actually, some wisdom from like a corporate perspective, really. That's what I kind of take away.
Yeah, it's again, I've had a lot of different, I've worked for Delta, I've worked for, JetBlue, entirely different experiences. And Delta was one I definitely wanted to get out. It was one I didn't leave because of a merger. It was one
the egos, huh? Yeah, the ego. Watch out.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much not invented here, and particularly, you didn't grow up with Delta, you grew up with Western, and in your job, and so they were, you know, it was, and I think they've gotten over that. It was very, you know, as they've grown and as they grew more and more international, they've become a much better managed company as well. But, you know, so I don't want to leave you with the impression that, that everything they do is a mistake. But,
Well, thank you, David. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks for the words of wisdom. And folks, go ahead, Mike.
No, I'm good.
And so go ahead, folks. If
You got the floor.
if you like the content, please like and subscribe. It helps the YouTube algorithm to keep the show going. And we really appreciate David Ulmer for being here. And folks, we'll see you next time.